Hi, I'm Carl Franklin. In this episode of Blazor Train, I'm going to show you how to do basic authentication and role-based authorization in a .NET 8 Blazor web app in global WebAssembly mode using the ASP.NET Core identity system. If you're interested in the demos that I've already done on auth in previous versions of .NET, you can find these linked in the show notes here on YouTube. Now, this demo covers Blazor web apps with the interactive render mode set to WebAssembly. That means you will have a server-based project and a client-based project. For the Blazor server version of this video, check out episode 26. Basic auth in Blazor WebAssembly is coming up right now, right here on Blazor Train! All right, we're going to start by creating a new Blazor web app, and we're going to call it Auth WASM Demo. Now, it's very important that we set all these options correctly. The authentication type is going to be individual accounts. The interactive render mode is going to be WebAssembly, and the interactivity location is going to be global. We're going to include the sample pages also. So this will create a solution with two projects. The top project, Auth WASM Demo, has the code and markup that contains the server-side elements, and the Auth WASM Demo.client project runs on the client. And together they make the complete solution. I will refer to them as the server project and the client project. So by selecting individual accounts for the authentication type, you get just about everything you need to secure your app, including user registration, log in and log out, and authorization based on whether the user is logged in or not, and with a single line of code, roles. So let's take a look here on the server. Under Components, there's an account folder and a bunch of pages. Let's look at these. Now, these are pages that would normally, in a .NET 7 application, for example, have to be scaffolded in. And they were also CSHTML pages or Razor pages, all server-side. In .NET 8, these are defined as Blazor pages. Now, check this out. We can also look under Manage to see a whole bunch of pages the user can use to manage their account. Change password, delete personal data, disable 2FA. It's all right there in the template. So now let's look at migrations under Data. Migrations are a feature of Entity Framework Core that enables you to manage database schema changes over time. Migrations allow you to update the database schema as your application evolves, without the need to drop the database and recreate it from scratch each time the data model changes. This is especially useful in applications with production data, where you need to preserve that data across updates. The template comes with a migration to create the initial database from scratch, and that's this right here. The file name starts with a bunch of zeros so that, I assume, it always ends up at the top of the list. So this is all of the code needed to create the database and all the tables. It's creating the tables, and then it's adding the indexes. Now we're going to use this to create a database for storing identity information, users, password hashes, roles, and all that. The default database is SQL Server, but you can easily use a more lightweight database such as SQLite by adding the SQLite package and changing the configuration in Program CS to use SQLite. If you're interested in doing that, I have a link to a discussion on Stack Overflow in my repo that might be helpful. So by default, the database name is going to be ASP.NET dash, then the name of your project, Auth WASM Demo, then a dash, and then a GUID. But this is the time where we could simplify all this, because the database hasn't been created yet. So let's just change that to Auth WASM Demo. Now, if you go over to SQL Server Object Explorer and you drop down the list of databases, you can see I only have Chinook and Northwind in here. So to create the database, I'm going to save everything, open up Package Manager Console, and I'm going to make sure that the default project is auth WASM demo, which is the server. And here I'm just going to say update database. Now the reason that I had to set this default project is because this project is where the migration is. And it makes sense. You don't want the client to have direct access to your database. So now if I refresh the list of databases, there's auth WASM demo right there. If I look at the tables, you can see I've got users, roles, claims, logins, tokens, all of that stuff. We don't have to access this database directly, but this is where stuff gets stored. And here's one thing that we should take a look at. In ASP.NET Users, columns, notice that there's no password field. There's a password hash field. And a hash is a one-way encryption. So when you take a password and you hash it, you get this gobbledygook that can be expressed as a string, but you can't use that string to decrypt and get the password. How it works is when the user enters a password is hashed, and then the hashes are compared. And if they're the same, the user typed the right password. All right, let's take a look at App Blazor, which is on the server in the Components folder. So you'll notice that the render mode is not set to a particular render mode directly. Instead, we have this render mode for page property, that's a read-only property, and it only returns interactive WebAssembly if the request path does not start with account. In other words, for all pages under account, we want to turn off interactivity, and that makes sense. But for all the rest of the pages, we're returning this interactive WebAssembly. Now, interactive WebAssembly by default uses pre-rendering. So if we want to turn off pre-rendering, we can just return a new interactive WebAssembly render mode with pre-rendering set to false. I'm going to do that. All right, let's take a look at Nav menu, which is in the client under Layout. So the Nav menu, when you use this template for individual accounts, uses this authorized view component. And the authorized view component has two subcomponents, authorized and not authorized. So if the user is not authorized, they see this markup, which includes links to register and log in. That makes sense. But if they are authorized, we have a link to account manage and log out. And that makes sense. So you can use this authorized view anywhere in your Blazor application to show markup based on whether the user is logged in or not. And that's what authorized means. It means the user has been logged in. Now, if you don't need to have a not authorized section, you don't have to use authorized and not authorized. You can just put whatever content you want in authorized view. And if they're logged in, it'll show. All right, so right now we can run the app. Now, we can't log in because we don't have a user, but we can register. So before we register, there's this page called auth, and it has an attribute at the top that requires authorization. If I try to go there without logging in, it sends me to the login page. Now, from here, I could register as a new user, or I could click this register link. Either way, we need to register ourselves. So I'll register myself with one of my email addresses. This is the email address I use for my audio podcasting media thing, PWOP, and the studio. And I'll just create a password, something that's easy to remember, but is not secure at all. Don't do that at home. Okay, so now I get this register confirmation. And it says you need to confirm your account by email. Now, out of the box, I don't have an email sender configured. So what happens if I actually click here to confirm my account? Well, let's go back and look at the data in the database. Here's users, and I'll view the data. And check this out. There's my name, my username, and then check out the email confirmed. That is set to false. And the process of doing an email confirmation, whether you do it directly by changing this to true, or you actually do the email process that sends a link and then it gets confirmed, that is going to set this particular thing to true, and that's what needs to be set before you can actually use the app authenticated. So I'll click to confirm my account. Thank you. And now let's look at that data again. We'll refresh it. And email confirmed is now true. So now I need to log in. Now if you click Remember Me and check that off, then the next time you run the app, you'll be logged in automatically. This is standard stuff. But I'm not going to do that here because I want to log in each time to make sure that I get the right roles associated with my account, which we'll talk about in a minute. So now that I'm logged in and I go to auth required, it says, hello, you are authenticated, happy, happy, joy, joy. And this is what I use to manage my account. My email, my password, whether I'm using two-factor authentication, which you have to set up, by the way, personal data, that kind of stuff. So let's stop this here and go check out auth.razor, which is in Pages in the client. And there's the magic right there. @attribute authorize in brackets. So that basically says, hey, if the user comes here and they're not logged in, we're going to redirect them to the login page. Now the login page also has the register link, and we showed that earlier. Next up, role-based authorization. So think of a role as a tag. It's text. Some examples might be can access finance, can manage, and admin. You can make them up and assign them to users. Now, if you look at the database here that we've created, you'll see we have these tables, ASP.NET roles and ASP.NET user roles. ASP.NET roles contains those roles, admin, whatever, and they're just strings. User roles associates a user with a role, and a user can have multiple roles. So to enable role-based authorization in the app, we need to make one change in the server projects program CS file. And it's right here where you're adding identity core. The very first fluent add should be this, .add roles of identity role. And note that this has to come before add entity framework stores or else it won't work. So now let's authorize a link to the counter page in nav menu to require a role named admin. So in nav menu, we'll go up to admin, and there is no authorized view on here, so let's add one. And we'll say roles equals admin. Now essentially what we've said is we only want to show this link to counter if the user is logged in, authorized view, and they are in the role of admin. So let's run the app, and we'll log in. And now you can see that the counter link, nav link, is not shown because we are not in the admin role. Well, the next set of questions is obviously, how do we create that admin role? And how do we assign it to our user? Now, you're a developer, so you might be tempted just to go use the database and edit it yourself. But you're going to find that that's not going to work because there are some GUIDs and things that you need to create and they need to be synchronized, and it's just never a good idea. So we're not going to do that. What we are going to do is check out this repo, this component that I've built. It's the Identity Manager Library, and I've used it before on Blazor Train. It's essentially a library that lets you do exactly what I said, manage users and roles, you pointed to a database, etc. But it even comes with a web app, a Blazor server app. And the Blazor server app makes it really easy. You just point it to the database and you can manage users and roles. So I'm going to run that now. So I've downloaded the code from GitHub. I loaded up the solution. I set Identity Manager Blazor Server as the startup project. And most importantly, I have to change the database connection string to point to my database. And this is it right here, auth WASM demo, local DB. Now let's run it. So the first thing we'll do is create a role called admin. There we go. Now we'll go over to users. We'll see my user right there. If I hit edit, I can add myself to the admin role, just like that. We're going to use this later, so we'll just minimize it, go back to our app, and run it again. Now I'll log in, and we should see the counter. Where's the counter? What happened? Well, this should work, and it does work in Blazor Server. However, in Blazor WebAssembly, it doesn't work. And here's why. This is a pull request on the .NET ASP.NET Core repo that happened just before .NET 8 was released, October 11th, 2023. It's number 51177. So they had a problem with the claims property of the info response, which comes back from a server with claims. And the problem was if you had multiple claims with the same type, it caused a problem. And so essentially they removed it. And that is why you're not getting these roles. Now it's still open, this issue. User claims missing from identity endpoints breaks authorization. It's still open as of this recording. So you can go ahead and read these for more information, but I've created a workaround. It's called Authorize Role View. And I've got a NuGet package for it. It's essentially a replacement for Authorize View. And when you use it in a Blazor WebAssembly app in .NET 8, in global mode, of course, then you can use it just as you would the Authorize View with roles. Here's the NuGet package. We're going to add that. And all of the instructions are right here on this repo. They're also in the repo for this Blazor Train episode, but I'll just go over them here with you. The first thing we're going to do is add this NuGet package to the client project. Here it is. Now the server and client projects must have an HTTP client configured with the base address of the server. And that is because the client's going to call an API endpoint on the server, which we're going to add, to retrieve the current logged in user's roles. So let's do the server side first. Now you've seen me do this before. Essentially, we need to create an HTTP client, and there isn't anything that we can just use automatically to get the base address of the server, and it's probably a good idea that we can't, because it changes when you go from development to production. So in development, it's going to be HTTPS localhost with some number, and that number is the port that's used for SSL. So if you go to Properties Launch Settings, right up here, and go down to HTTPS, that is the port name where we run it. You could also just run your app, and it's going to be what you see in the address bar. So 7290 is our address. So I'll just replace that here. Now on the client, it's a lot easier. And here's the thing. In .NET 7, when we created a hosted Blazor WebAssembly application, which this essentially is, they gave you controllers on the server, and they gave you a pre-configured HTTP client here in Program CS. But they didn't do that in .NET 8. So let's add it right here. You want a new HTTP client with the base address set to a new URI, which is builder.hostenvironment base address. And you can't do this on the server, right? All right, so that's step one. Now let's create that API endpoint. Let's go down in the server's Program CS, right below app run, and this is it. Now this is a magic string right here, /API/roles. That is what my code looks for by default. But if you want to change it, you can just download the code, recompile it, or use a configuration or whatever. Doesn't really matter. So here's an API endpoint, roles, and it's async, and it passes in an HTTP context. And we grab the user from the HTTP context, and if they have an identity and they are authenticated, we get the roles from the claims, and if we have any, we return them. Otherwise, we return a not found with no roles found for this user. Now, if they're not authenticated, we return unauthorized. And since the whole thing requires authorization, we add this little thing at the end, require authorization. Now, of course, if you want to create a controller and do anything else, when roles are requested, you could do that as well. But this is the easy way, the happy path. So lastly, we're going to go to _imports on the client and add using Blazor authorize role view, which we need. Okay, now let's go to nav menu, and where we had this authorize view, we're going to change that to authorize role view. Now let's see what happens. So I'm going to log in. Ta-da! I see counter. Okay. Now I'm going to log out again, and I won't see counter because I'm not even logged in. Never mind the role check. But here's the thing. You see, I can actually go there, right? I'm here at home. I could just navigate to counter, and it says, yeah, sure, no problem. So really the only thing that I set an authorize rule around was the link. So how do we secure the page? Well, we already saw with auth required, we could do that. Okay, so that would work. But what about with roles? How do we authorize the counter page with roles? Let's go to counter, and we're going to replace it. So here's the easy way. You have an authorized role view requiring the admin role, and if they're authorized, show the content. If they're not authorized, we could say you're not authorized to view this page. We don't really want to redirect them, right? Because they're already logged in. So this is the way that you would do it with authorized role view. Let's try it. All right, let's just try going to the counter page directly. And I get, I'm not authorized to view this page, right? So in this situation, maybe a redirect to login would be good. So I'll log in. Now I can go to counter and everybody's happy. And just to show you that this is working, we could use another role here, like my role, and log in, and we'll see the link because admin is the role required to see the link, but my role is the role required to actually use the page. So we'll log in. We'll go there, and I'm not authorized because I'm not in that my role. Okay, sometimes you may want to allow a certain block of code to run only if the user is authenticated and or in a particular role. This is very different than simply authorizing markup, which is what we've done up to this point. So we can write code to easily test to see if the user is logged in and or in a role. Let's change counter again. All right, so I've created a message here that I'm showing in red, message string. And when I increment the count, I'm checking to see that the user is authenticated or logged in. And if they are logged in, then we can allow them to increment the count. Right? And there's no other requirements on this page. So anybody can come here, but they just can't click the button unless they're logged in. All right, let's just go to counter. Okay. Now I'm not authorized to increment the counter because I'm not logged in. So if I log in, now I can go to counter and everybody's happy. Okay, so let's further restrict this access to those who are in a special role, which we'll create called counter clicker. All right, so I have the authorize attribute at the top of the page, meaning we can't even get to this page unless we're logged in. All right. Now my authorize role view specifies the counter clicker role, but I'm not going to use it to authorize markup. I'm going to use it to authorize code. And right down here, when they increment the count, I'm awaiting authorize role view.isInRole counter clicker to see if I'm in the counter clicker role. And if I am, then I can increment the count. So I haven't created that role, so this should fail. So log in. Okay, go to counter, click, and I'm not authorized. So let's go back to our identity manager and add that role and assign it to my user. All right, so we'll create a new role called counter clicker. There we go. Now go back to my user, edit, and add them to counter clicker. Done. Now I'll log out and log back in, go to counter, and everybody's happy. So there you go, role-based authorization, not only of markup, but of code in a .NET 8 Blazor Global WebAssembly app. Now back to you in the studio, Carl. I'd like to thank my Microsoft friend Jeremy Lickness and the rest of the team for working hard on the new Blazor auth user interface. It's definitely a lot better than it was, and it's free and still available in .NET 8. Hey, thanks for riding the rails with me today. This is where I jump off. I'll see you next time. Blaze the train!